Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan. I'm an editor at Aval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me today is Yuriy Nemets. He's an attorney and an author of the Red Notice Abuse blog, and he is based in Washington, D.C. Yuriy, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Turkey is set to host the upcoming General Assembly meeting for Interpol in November this year, after last year's event was postponed over COVID-19. This meeting is going to involve some votes for new members of Interpol's executive committee and the branch responsible for processing the agency's data. So new changes are expected to at least take place. What to you is the importance, Yuri, for Turkey in hosting this meeting of Interpol this year?
Um, I would say I'm more concerned than anything else at this point for two reasons. First is because Turkey is known for abusing Interpol, and the fact that the organization still is still willing to hold its General Assembly, which is the body of the supreme authority within the organization there, to me suggests that Interpol just doesn't care about its reputation too much. And obviously the fact that it just so happens that they're going to elect the new members of the Commission for the Control of Interpol's Files, which is it's supposed to be an independent body within Interpol that has exclusive jurisdiction to review complaints from individuals challenging government abuse of Interpol's channels. That seems to me just sadly ironic.
And after this announcement was made, there was Turkish officials who were going to the press, and they were playing up Turkey as one of Interpol's "quote unquote" most effective members of the organization. But the relationship has been tense, to say the least, especially after the failed coup attempt in July 2016. And most of this friction between Turkey and Interpol has revolved around Interpol not accommodating all of Turkey's red notice requests and for members of the Gulenist movement, which it considers a terrorist organization responsible for the coup attempt. And just this week, Turkish minister, the Turkish deputy foreign minister, he complained about Turkey's dissatisfaction with the agency over the Gulenists. And of course, this also plays into another event that happened this week, because a Turkish court issued a warrant for the arrest of Can Dündar. He's the former editor of Cumhuriyet, and an Interpol official told DW that they did not accept his request ultimately. And to my knowledge, this is not the first time they've rejected a red notice request for Dündar. But do you think, now that Turkey is going to be hosting this conference in November, do you think that they will use it as an opportunity to try to influence new rules or reforms that will accommodate its demands, namely like this pursuit of its critics overseas, even if that goes against Interpol's own founding articles?
I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely. But to just go to the beginning of your question, I want to warn that whatever data we hear about, Interpol rejecting or accept or approving requests from Turkey, or from any other country. Unfortunately, this information is most of the time is based on speculations. The commission has the power to disclose to the public. They publish this annual reports, how many complaints they received against each and every country, what allegations were made in those complaints, how many times the commission found violations and what those violations were, again, with regard to each and every country. Despite the fact that it has this power, it doesn't do it. It's never done that. So we don't really know who this country's major abusers are. We assume and that's very unfortunate. We assume from media reports, which might not necessarily be accurate, we as practitioners, we know how many cases, we handled against, any specific country and how they ended and so forth. But this is nowhere close to, getting the full picture. And that's very unfortunate. The commission should publish this information. Otherwise, it sort of like willingly or unwillingly protects at least the reputation of this country's abusers. In terms of whether or not Turkey will be able to change anything in terms of the rules so that its requests go through the system and get published in the database. Again, I don't think so, because at this point the system is the entire mechanism is so flawed in terms of guaranteeing individuals due process and actually observing human rights, that I don't really think that a government has to do much to make it worse. I believe that incident, when again, I only know about it because of media reports. I've never been able to confirm it. When several years ago there was this publication that apparently Interpol denied cooperation in hundreds of cases. I'm sorry, I believe it was, the claim was in the article. It was a media claiming like 60,000 names that Turkey tried to put on the Interpol wanted list following the failed coup in 2016. I don't know if this number is correct or not, but I would assume, for example, if that actually did happen, probably Interpol could probably catch that, because it was so much information coming in within such a short period of time. Unfortunately, Interpol very rarely catches an abusive government request before it gets published in the database. In other words, when it's already too late. I can give you an example of how how flawed the system is in this regard. At least, for example, Interpol has refugee and asylum seeker policy, which says that Interpol generally should not process information published against refugees and asylum seekers. The problem is that that again does not protect refugees and asylum seekers from actually getting into the database before they learn that this information is coming in. They usually learn that they're in a database after they already detained. So whatever relief they get, which again the policy provides them as refugees and asylum seekers, they usually claim it after they get detained, which again is too late, and at that point they can already face extradition or other consequences. I think it's unlikely that during this particular General Assembly anything changes for the better. But at the same time, I don't think anything is going to change in the sense that they'll make the rules worse than they already are.
And this brings another question to my mind with what you said there, because I think very often when we think about, or when we hear about abuse of Interpol by other countries, the main thing that comes to mind is issuing red notices that go into the system. But what are other ways that countries like Turkey or others who are suspected of taking advantage of Interpol for their own ends? What other ways do they abuse the system?
Red notices, they just well known, again, from the media, books, movies. Red notices, it's just one way to abuse the system. There are diffusions, and there is for example, the stolen lost trail documents database. A diffusion effectively is the same thing as a red notice in terms of its consequences. That is, you can still be detained and potentially extradited and face what we call, in addition to that, face what we call collateral effects. Collateral effects such as having your bank accounts closed, visas canceled. You can lose your job if your employer cares, of course. A diffusion is something that a government can. So a red notice is published after the Interpol General Secretariat approves it for publication. The process is incredibly brief, just because any government, when it fills out a request for red notice, the amount of information that they have to provide is so basic that most of the time Interpol cannot establish whether an incoming request is abusive, that is against its rules, for example. And the governments have learned to trick Interpol, and it's not that hard. So Article 3 of the Interpol Constitution prohibits the organization from participating in any activity of a political nature. But governments almost always do not charge their political opponent with, for example, and sometimes their laws do not provide for such a violation. For example, they don't charge anybody with with insulting the head of the state. They charge a political opponent with, for example, fraud based on trumped up charges, which is a perfectly ordinary law crime, and without any additional information doesn't really call into question the legality of the red notice. Diffusions, despite the fact that just this preliminary review for red notices is so basic and doesn't really allow Interpol most of the time to assess what the case is really about. Diffusions are published by governments without that review, and a government technically can choose whichever mechanism to use. So the Commission for the Control of Interpol's Files, in one of its recent annual reports, admitted to the fact that it had to deal with cases in which, after a red notice was denied by Interpol, deleted for whatever reason, a government, for example, because it violated Article 3 of its constitution, the same governments were able to put, there have been cases in which the same governments were able to put the same individuals back into the database after that decision, just using diffusions or using the stolen and lost travel documents database, which is, if you think about it, absolutely incredible. Not only does Interpol fail to provide individuals basic due process guarantees, such as there is no right to hearing, there is no right to appeal, and there is no right to examine evidence that the government produced against you. But in addition to that, Interpol seems to fail to institute a comprehensive enforcement mechanism of its own decisions. If this is the case, and we're talking basically, establishing a simple filter mechanism, like adding a filter to whatever their software that would screen incoming requests and stop those that, for example, match the same name that's already been before the commission, and the government request has been rejected. So there have been cases like this, again, by Interpol's own admission. Turning to the stolen and lost travel documents database, a government, if the person continues to use the passport of his home country, can use Interpol to alert other governments that particular passport has been, again, lost or stolen or invalidated for other reasons, which means the person will most likely be stopped. The consequences while crossing the border, for example, right? The consequences of that can be, unpredictable as well. What the Commission has written in its recent annual reports, again, is that it seems like the only thing that Interpol has done so far with regard to the SLTD database, the stolen and lost travel documents database, is amend the organization's rules, meaning Interpol bets on this same abusive government somehow all of a sudden becoming law-abiding and following its rules, which is, again, to me, seems absolutely mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. And the Commission for Control of Interpol's Files is the one that sticks in my mind the most actually, because those are some of the open seats that will be filled at the Istanbul conference in November. And to me, it seems whether they're able to get a place on the commission, or a candidate from another country that would be supportive of their goals would be something very desirable for Turkey there. But what though might limit Turkey's chances of really being able to take advantage of any position on the CCF if it is successful in getting a candidate there?
So under Interpol's rules, a member of the commission who is a national of the country against which a complaint is filed cannot take part in consideration of that particular case. So that's a good thing, obviously. Um, whether there might be any unlawful informal communications among members of the commission, I hope not. But when several years ago, the Meng Hongwei, a Chinese national, was elected president of Interpol, there was a lot of sort of there were so many comments made about how how that might negatively affect Interpol. And then after he was arrested in China and was recalled and so forth, Interpol had to elect a new president. There were more comments about there was a Russian national running then. There were again a lot of sort of many waves made again about that as well, that somehow Interpol is going to become somehow Interpol because of that will be abused by Russia. I think that there are two important things that we must remember. The sort of protective mechanism against this abuse within the commission, I already explained it. If you're national, you cannot take part in considering a case filed against your country. In terms of, for example, Interpol presidency, the Interpol president, it sounds very how should I put it? Sounds very too important. It sounds too important for what it really is. Interpol's president has the executive committee, Interpol's executive committee. The executive committee, first of all, they have several members, and they usually resolve issues by the majority of votes. But what's more important is that the executive committee cannot change the rules that, for example, the General Assembly has adopted. They must execute them. The executive committee cannot tell the General Secretariat, order them around. They cannot, the commission cannot take orders from anybody. Nobody can give the commission for the control of Interpol's files, any orders. It's independent. Instead of concentrating on on who exactly gets elected and that they can somehow influence the entire thing while on this post, I think that we're missing a more important, the point that's really important here, which is Interpol needs reforms. Just by preventing countries from taking these positions, we're not going to resolve anything. And yes, I agree. Having said that, I agree. I believe that any country known for abusing Interpol should not, just for reputational purposes, for the organization itself, should not be allowed to take any of this major roles as a member of the commission or as Interpol's president. There is no question about it. But this is just a part of the entire campaign, if you want to call it, that at the same time isn't really, as I said, going to resolve anything by itself. What we really need is carrying out additional reforms at Interpol, in addition to introducing the things that I've already mentioned: the right to hearing, the right to appeal, the right to examine evidence the government produced against you. We need to make the process more transparent. The commission should publish information about countries' abusers, what I mentioned, how many times they abused the system, what their violations were, and so forth. That's the important part. concentrating too much on, who's going to take what posts. Again, as I said, we should, just for the purposes of, Interpol's own reputation. Its previous General Assembly, well, previous, not that long ago, was in China. China, again, obviously known as a country that abuses Interpol. So I don't think that should have happened either.
Mm-hmm.
And they shouldn't be holding, they shouldn't be meeting, the General Assembly shouldn't be meeting in countries that are known for that abuse, especially if Turkey really tried. Interpol knows this. We don't. Interpol, I'm sure, knows what happened between Turkey and the General Secretariat when they allegedly I'm sorry, tried to abuse Interpol as part of that campaign against the failed coup. They should be more, caring about the organization's reputation as well, because that sends the signal if they actually willing to really observe human rights, which they must do under their constitution.
Their own constitution. And we talked about a number of countries now, aside from Turkey, that of course have been accused of abusing Interpol. China, Russia, of course. Another one that came to my mind when you were answering my previous question was the United Arab Emirates, which they also very publicly tried to push for their own candidate to head the organization, but were met with resistance as well. And then there was, of course, some controversy over the financial contributions from the Emirates to Interpol that some thought was leading to an undue amount of influence over the organization, or they were alleging that that's what the case was. And as proof, they're pointing to the fact that Abu Dhabi hosted a number of more Interpol conferences in recent years than a number of other countries had done. But this makes me also just think, as voting is going to be a part of the Istanbul conference. Turkey's drifting, of course, right now between its democratic allies like the United States on one hand, and then, of course, in the direction at the same time as their authoritarian counterparts like Russia and China. So their vote, in my mind, in terms of any of the candidates that might go forward for these positions, it seems like it could be a swing one. But do you think it's likely Turkey would be more inclined to support, if not their own candidate for any of these major positions, then one from another country that might be amiable to their request, like say Russia?
Yeah, no, if um just to answer my question, make a long story short. If we have the commission filled at this point with members from Russia, China, UAE, Turkey, and say Egypt, we're in trouble. I mean, there is no other way to put it. I hope that's not going to happen. It's just I just can't. I just can't. I hope they're not going to do it. I hope the General Assembly is going to act in a different way. The problem is, again, Interpol's rules do not provide for any of this. I mean, they do not prohibit countries, found to be in violation of Interpol's rules on a regular basis from submitting their candidates. And again, even if they say try, even for example, if there was such a provision in Interpol's rules, enforcing it without the commission publishing the information about specific violations and the extent by country by country, it would just be unenforceable. So we need both things. I agree. The rules should say it, and the commission should publish this information. At this point, though, I hope that the General Assembly, is prudent enough to not completely demolish, Interpol's reputation, and at least make sure that the commission appears to be a really independent body, not just, on paper, but a really independent body, not comprised, not filled with members from countries that are known for abuse. And you're right, it's Russia, Egypt, China, UAE, I can name several other countries, taking into consideration the political unrest in several other countries. I totally expect them to submit their own candidates, and there will probably be more cases filed against them now that they're going against their political opponents. Ted Brown and I have published an article in Forbes. We try to suggest that political unrest leads to increased number of cases before the commission. That is, whenever a coup happens, failed or not, when a revolution happens or a government changes, in certain countries, certain countries face additional complaints filed against them with the commission. But the reason I say we suggest that is because, again, the commission refuses to publish a more accurate information, or to be more precise, they publish almost no information on that. We just basically took a political event, for example, a coup in revolution in Ukraine, or like a coup in Turkey, or political events in Egypt, and then there was the number of complaints against these countries went up, which again suggests that they might have issued more politically motivated requests than before, which led to more complaints against them. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
And with all that in mind, for my last question, since this conference is going to involve voting on these new members, and there's clearly a lot on the plate that in terms of needed reforms just to protect Interpol from being, well, just lack of a better term, captured by the interests of authoritarian countries. Just to rehash, really, what do you think that the Democratic countries that will be attending this conference, what are the main things that they should be pushing to ensure that Interpol stays independent, but also is able to remain completely functional without being unduly influenced or undermined from within?
So as I said, they need to amend the rules. The General Assembly can meet and vote for additional reforms that we already talked about. They can absolutely do that. The problem is that, of course, they have to somehow convince at least some non-democratic countries to vote with them. But there is another problem here, unfortunately, and that is some democratic countries, first of all, in general, democratic countries, in my opinion, do not do enough to change Interpol. You can make as many speeches as you want, publish as many press releases as you want as a congressman or member of the EU Parliament, but that's, as we've learned, doesn't really lead anywhere. At least not to the extent that we need Interpol to change. Another problem is that some countries democratic countries willingly or unwillingly basically aid and abet non-democratic countries in the abuse of Interpol. I can give you a recent example. There's been a case in which a United States District Court, it was literally just less than a month ago, dismissed the case against Interpol because Interpol is immune from lawsuits in the United States, with very few exceptions. And the individual filed a lawsuit against Interpol alleging lack of due process within Interpol. Interpol claimed immunity and the case was over. Which again, sort of, the United States, we already have two bills pending in Congress addressing Interpol abuse. I don't think they're perfect. I mean, they definitely need to be amended, but at least it's some start. So there is a lot of there is a lot of sort of a lot of information going around, and U.S. congressmen are interested, they appear to be interested in changing the system and doing something about it. And again, these bills are at least some proof of that. But at the same time, our own laws guarantee Interpol immunity from lawsuits, even if it comes to Interpol violating an individual's due process rights. So that in itself is, in my opinion, just shouldn't be happening. It's appalling. There is no recourse then. So again, if you don't have the right to appeal before Interpol after it denies your complaint, where do you usually go? And the answer is, unfortunately, there is not that much recourse. And this decision proves it yet again. That needs to be changed as well. I think that, for example, in the United States and in other countries, especially in democratic countries, one of the ways, in my opinion, to push Interpol to carry out additional reforms, because at this point, I don't think there is any incentive for it to do it, despite all the criticism in the media and from human rights organizations and so forth. It seems like, because not much has been done in the past several years, maybe Interpol doesn't really care about those statements made on, at this point, regular basis. Maybe one of the ways to incentivize it, give it this push, is to strip it from its immunity, at least under this condition that until it changes the system, until it changes itself, which again it can, no such immunity will be granted. I think that would be that's something that also needs to be done, must be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with this conference being months away from now in November, we're going to end up seeing how things develop in the run up to it. But until then, Yuriy, thank you very much for joining me here on Turkey Abroad for this conversation. And hopefully around that time, when the conference kicks off, we'll be able to speak again on developments that come out of it.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.